Hello, today we'll talk about clinical case of hysterical neurosis. Description: a young woman, Olivia, 33 years old, was hospitalized at the cardiovascular care clinic with the diagnosis of heart attack. She's very feminine, attractive, and stylish. She depended on her partner entirely for financial support, who was 25 years older than her. She didn't tolerate a thought of coming to the labor market. Olivia preferred rather sitting at home with their 3-year-old girl. She was complaining persistently about impossible relations with her partner, who was officially married with 3 children. She called their relation unofficial marriage. She seemed to feel comfortable in this position of unofficial wife, which allowed her to have a part-time husband, that is to say, seeing him from time to time, and at the same time considering herself a wife, a woman with a partner. Nevertheless, Olivia claimed that those relations were driving her crazy. They argued all the time. She was convinced that he was excessively demanding towards her and that she was supposed to serve him 24 hours a day, regardless of what she wanted. When her partner was visiting her at the hospital, we, as a medical team, noted the particular tenderness and care with which he was addressing her, holding her hand, and fulfilling orders whenever she was asking for something. Also, he negotiated with the doctors so that they provided her with the best room and the best services regardless of the price. He maintained a daily contact with the chief doctor so as to remain up to date with her health status. Reason for hospitalization: heart attack. Symptoms are those of inner conflict and long-lasting depression. Anamnesis: no running psychic illness in her family. Self-awareness: initially she was rejecting help, however later she realized that, something wrong was happening with me. Request: I want to be an active girl, full of life, like I used to be before I met my husband. About family: she had extremely unstable and insecure relation with her father, which was transiting from intimate and privileged presence with Olivia Kidd and total absence during the months of his business trips. When my father was at home, he was cooking meals for me, was reading funny stories. He was never doing so for my brother. However, when he was traveling on business trips, he was calling only mom and didn't wish to talk to us at all. This paternal investment will always come across in the psychoanalytical work, impacting her relations with men. In her case, it's either longing for intimacy and physical proximity, or it's total rejection, which brings about a feeling of loneliness and abandonment, which in its turn pushes her in embrace of random men, so that simply to be a woman with a partner. The relation with her mom has been much more complex. Olivia was extremely dependent on her mom. The patient explains that she was not able to hide anything from her. Mother was occupying the whole psychological space of her daughter. Olivia confesses, that was much stronger than me. I had to tell her everything. I was not able to keep any secret for myself, which irritated my husband, and now he refrains from telling me certain things. The relation to her older brother is more psychically accessible. Olivia admired him and wanted to look just like him. In her childhood, Olivia used to dress and talk like a boy. Her hair was cut in a boy's hair cut. She used to play boys' games. She describes herself as a tomboy. Somewhere she deemed that her parents liked her brother more than her. Because he was a boy and I was a little girl, nobody was even paying attention to me. My father could have gone fishing with my brother or do car repairs in the garage, and of what use could I have been? My mom was always comparing me with my brother, so all my childhood and probably even now I have been doing my best just to look like him. He was my ideal. I was always asking myself why my brother and I have not been made equal. My parents never explained this to me. It was a taboo subject. About the other. As any patient with hysterical symptoms, Olivia's relation with the other was extremely eroticized despite her greatly deficient sexuality. The other was always lacking something. She sought to prove that the other is impotent. Her mother, her husband, her analyst. Olivia maintained a dependent relation with her husband, which seemed to be a replica of her relation with her mother. About relation to a body. She was unhappy about her body, which she considered to be not like it should be. And she was even more unsatisfied about her position as a woman. She was seeking for her masculine part to be recognized. About transfer. The transfer helped numerous fears to come alive. Initially, it was unclear to me which place exactly I was taken for her in transfer. She was alternately putting me on the place of her mother, then father, all in all at the place of a master who she wanted to seduce and then castrate. For example, when she didn't know how to act, she was always asking my advice just to make sure that my advice would be wrong and she could leave analysis. The transfer also worked in a way that she was recommending me to her friends' circle who were coming with exactly the same symptomatology as her. About dreams. One of her dreams is a senior man comes to seduce a young woman who sits alone immersed into her thoughts. She refuses his courtship and runs away looking back. In other dreams, her analyst was often popping up as a transit figure who doesn't participate explicitly in the dream, however, she is present. Clinical picture. Olivia suffered from a genuinely painful and disabling hysterical neurosis. It seems important to stress that when faced with a case of hysteria, one can never be sure that the trauma is imaginary. Freud himself never asserted that the trauma of the hysteric was always of imaginary nature. In any case, even if the event is imaginary, the revival of traumatic experience is totally real. Besides, it doesn't matter if the trauma was real or imaginary, since an analyst constantly works with the imaginary. The trauma of the sex differences resulted in her having a massive phallic claim, tomboy, and the need to construct a scenario to try to explain this traumatic experience. If I have something less than my brother, it means that something terrible has happened to me. Unbearable lack testifies to her physical feeling and the conviction that she had a forgotten trauma of childhood. The awareness of sex differences seems to have broken into the psyche of Olivia Kidd in a moment of discovery of her intimacy. This event seems to have been massively suppressed, then reactivated in the aftermath during the advent of puberty and once again during her marital experience. Indeed, the sex differentiation, tomboy, and the experience of lack, something is missing, are two issues that have gradually become closely entangled over the course of the analytical work. Olivia was stuck in the renunciation which the marital situation imposed on her, sending her directly to the unbearable prejudice of castration and to this place of the tomboy. For Olivia, this lack seemed impossible to be figured out and integrated, which explains her difficulty in separation and therefore the fusional nature of the bond to her mother, then to her husband, and in the transfer to the analyst. Olivia was experiencing troubles with her femininity and put all her efforts so that to look feminine. Hysteria was for her a way to accept her femininity. That is to say, she was organizing her life in such a way so that not to achieve satisfaction, because only like this she had power. A hysteric doesn't aim at being satisfied because in this case she will not have power. About analytical work. When we first met, she was lying apathetically in her ward's bed. I came in, introduced myself, and let her know that at this hospital the service of psychological consultation is available. Whenever she wanted to use it, she was welcome. She answered that she didn't need psychologist and she doubted that anybody would be able to help her. I answered that in her reply I was able to hear a call for help, even though she was not admitting it. A few days later, she knocked at my cabinet's door with a pretentious expression, a quote, "I simply decided to walk around and check up on your cabinet." At the first session, she was very tense and passively aggressive towards me, non-reluctant to talk at all. At the second session, she declared, a quote, "Yes, I'd like to undergo therapy because I want to know what's happening with me. I am certain something terrible happened to me." It is out of the interest that Freud had in his patients suffering from hysterical symptoms that psychoanalysis was born. In the story of this hysterical patient, we find the notion of an ancient trauma. The trauma is represented by the perception of the sex differences with the renunciation of bisexuality, which is uncontestably a narcissistic wound, alongside with the wound of the lack of penis, which became to her an object of envy and desire, which had to be renegotiated during the analytical work. Freud stated that on the one hand, a hysterical symptom is the expression of a male unconscious phantasm, and on the other hand, that of feminine sexual phantasm. Therefore, Olivia remained fixated in the Oedipal conflict, in the anxiety of castration, the anxiety of sex differences, and in the phallic claim, an impossible renunciation of masculinity. Olivia attempted to fill in the lack experienced as trauma with all possible and available scenarios. Mom seemed to have excited her child instead of simply meeting her physical needs in childhood. Otherwise, from where does this insatiable need for fusion projected upon others comes from? The seduction of a father fantasized or provoked will come as a replica of the maternal seduction. A quote, "I don't remember anything. I don't know when it happened, but I feel it in my body. Something was done to me." Olivia testifies to the intense, diffuse psychocorporal anxiety and a form of psychic excitement, which is difficult to contain, so much was she impatient to find out what really happened. During a long time she was defending herself against being desired. She was asserting that she has never had a desire for anything. She struggled with tremendous difficulties in making a choice and oftentimes tried within the framework of therapeutical relation unsuccessfully to get some advice. She was asking, a quote, "What do you think about me? Every time I'm going to see you, I start thinking of what I will tell you and what will you answer me." All her evoked conflicts were externalized, which allowed her to avoid a too risky and too subjective position which would imply questioning her own desire. The analysis lasted 3 years with 1 year interval. The work consisted in accepting castration and searching for what she lacked, a phallus, externally. What helped? First of all, stable position of analyst to who she was able to come back, a figure who was present when she was addressing to me. Secondly, symbolization. On a later stage of our work, she asked, who was she in my eyes? And I replied to her that now you are like a fragile vase, a careless movement, and this vase might fall again. This image invested by analyst became dear to her to the point that Olivia stopped arguing with her partner. Every time he was starting a dispute, she was reiterating from it, keeping in mind that she was a fragile vase. Changes which happened during the analysis. She started admitting that she was experiencing strong emotions and desires which scared her and against which she was defending herself. She moved to Dubai, started a new life, got a job in a man's sphere, selling cars, and was earning money herself, which was the lacking fallacy for her. A quote, I earn myself, it means I'm worth something.